Hey, Granny Gear here for Old Guy on a Bike. Today we're talking about sealant. More importantly, we're talking about dried up sealant in your tire and, well, what should we do about that on this Tech Tuesday? You know, when tubeless tire technology came along for, well, mountain bikes first, and of course now gravel bikes, road bikes, and pretty much everything else, it brought along with it tubeless tire sealant. You know, that goopy stuff in a bottle, kind of like this Wilderness Trail Bikes tubeless tire sealant that I like to use, but there's all kinds of brands. Well, that's the gooey stuff that's inside your tire floating around that seals up that little hole when that cactus thorn or that piece of wire on the road or that little sidewall cut happens. You hope that the tubeless tire sealant will come to your rescue and plug up that hole so you can keep riding and do less time fixing your bike on the trail. But along with tubeless tires and tubeless tire sealant, there's a little bit of responsibility. We have to maintain it because what happens with tubeless tire sealant like this, and pretty much all of the other ones too, is eventually the liquid that is in your tire will dry up. If it doesn't leak out first because maybe you had a hole you didn't know about or something you tried to fix and then you don't have as much sealant in there as you would like to have. But in any case, even if it's stored, even if you're not riding it, it will eventually dry out. And when it does dry out, the suspended particles, like in this case, there's a bit of, I assume there's latex in there, I'm not sure for sure, but there certainly is some little gritty particles that clot that hole up, or something like orange seal, which is pretty much latex based. All that stuff doesn't dry up. Where does it go? Well, I'll tell you where it goes, and it stays inside your tire. And the question is, do we care? And it's a good question. Now, I think some people I know, they regularly will dismount their tubeless tires and they'll clean them out just kind of fairly regular basis, maybe once every month, once every couple months. One caveat to that though is each time you do that, you're breaking that seal you have grown to love between your tire and your rim, right? That nice seal that's airtight. You would have to reestablish that every time, which not that big a deal, but that's something. As well, you may find that a tire that you mounted when it was new and tight did it with a floor pump. When it's stretched a little bit and your rim tape is dimpled a little bit, well, you may find out that all of a sudden a floor pump is not enough and you may need an air compressor to get that same tire and rim combination to set. And besides that, you run the risk of maybe gouging your rim tape if the tire is tight or you have big old levers or you're just unlucky. So I try to dismount my tires as little as possible. Now, what I do to check sealant real quick is I will pull the Presta-Core with a little tube like this. I'll take a little dipstick. You can use a zip tie. This, I think, came with orange seal sealant at one time. I'll put it down inside the Presta with the valve down at the bottom, gravity-wise, you know, so it's like a dipstick, right? Check the oil on your car, boop, see if there's anything in there. If there is, I'm pretty good to go. If it seems a little bit dry, I don't really see much on there, I will inject sealant with my little homemade injecting machine, and I'll put a link to this. This is like Amazon and auto parts stuff, cost a few bucks, works really, really well. So that's what I do. And I also, just in case, I keep a little box around of Presta-Cores in case one is so gunked up. So it's kind of my little kit. But what about the dried up sealant that's in there? What about if you don't take your tire off? Do we care? Well, a couple different scenarios for you. Now take a look at this video. Whoa, I'm falling down. Now take a look at this video here. The other day I was dismounting tires on the gravel bike, putting some new test tires on, which are secret sauce and I can't tell you about yet, but are going to be very cool. The rear tire was worn out, been on there a long time. The front tire was a little bit newer. They're both the same tire. They're WTB Resolutes in a 42 millimeter size. Now the front tire, you can see, is the one that has a little bit less accumulated sealant in there because as the liquid dries out, the particles are left and they kind of coat the tire. So you can see that white accumulation in there. On one tire, it's not all that heavy. There's some in there, but not a whole lot. And on the other tire, on the rear tire that's worn out, there's a lot in there and you can see it. Now, here's the question. Do we care, at least in this situation? Well, that accumulated sealant dried up in there, it really isn't helping things stay sealed. I mean, if you poked a hole right underneath a bunch of it, would it help air not get out of your tire? Yes, it probably would, but that may not be enough in that case to actually seal. but it isn't hurting it in any case either, and it might actually help seal a little hole as it comes along. It's also evenly distributed around the tire. Now, there's a reason I say that, because if it's all accumulated in one spot, that would be bad, okay? Because the other day, for instance, working on my road bike, I'm in the work stand, I'm going through the gears, and I'm spinning the rear tire. You know, in the work stand, you get the rear tire spinning pretty fast, right? Zzz, going along. And I realized the whole work stand was hopping up and down. I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I let the tire slow way down, the wheel and tire, and I watched it swing, and it stopped where the bottom of the tire and wheel was not where the valve stem was. And the valve stem typically is the heavier part of the wheel in balance, which let me think that there was something in that wheel that might be, well, a little bit clumpy, shall we say. I dismounted the tire. Sure enough, there was a big accumulated clunk of dried sealant particles in there, and that was causing an imbalance situation. You know, like when you take your tire to the tire store and your wheel and tire in your car or your truck, and they add weight to balance it where it's out of balance. Otherwise, you get that bouncy feeling. Well, on a bicycle, let's say like a road bike, the wheel and tire are such a small weight that just doesn't weigh that much. So it's spinning compared to your body weight really isn't going to make you lose control, but you probably can feel it a little bit, even if you're not aware of what's going on. Better to not have that imbalance. So I cleaned that out, resealed the tire, Bob's your uncle. But since you can see on this video that the sealant is accumulated pretty evenly, there aren't any really heavy spots, well, then does it matter? Well, it is added weight. Now, just for fun, I know the weight of a new 42 millimeter WTB Resolute, and I compared that to the rear tire that's so heavily, has so much of a coating on it. Now, this is a fairly worn out tire, so there's less rubber on it, but it still weighed 80 grams more than a new tire. Well, 80 grams isn't that much, but on the other hand, it's on the very far outside of your wheel and tire, and you know how that works, right? The more the weight is toward the outside of the wheel, if it was 80 grams heavier in the hub, you're going to notice it. Would you notice it on a tire? Well, you might. And if you're really sensitive to like keeping your bike as fast and scooty as possible, you probably don't really want another 80 grams of stuff inside your tire that really isn't helping you do anything. Now, another thing to keep in mind, this is a bike I have been riding constantly since I put those tires on. I doubt an entire week goes by where I don't jump on my gravel bike and ride it, because I'm alternating between road bike, gravel bike, road bike, gravel bike. But I ride that quite a bit. But if you have a bike that's sitting in a garage or your house or wherever it is, and it's got sealant in it, maybe you don't ride it for extended period of time, maybe a month, maybe a few weeks, I don't know, maybe all summer. And then maybe, or winter, if you're in cold climates, and all of a sudden you go to ride it and you think, oh, I better put a little sealant in there, and you go ride. Well, what probably has happened is the sealant that was in there was sitting in a little puddle in one spot, and it didn't move. And what it got to do was it all dried out, and it really is stuck to your tire now in one little puddle of dried sealant. Then that will certainly give you kind of an out of balance feeling in your tire. And it's one of those things, like if your tubeless tires have been sitting around for a really long time, before you go into your riding season again, it's really not a bad idea to pop at least half of the tire off one side of the bead, get in there, have a look, see what's in there, clean it up really well, and remount your tire. When you are doing that, a couple more things real quick. You want to make sure that sealant, let's say you're going to take a tire off, you're going to put it right back on again, or you're going to store it. I like to, if I've broken that seal between the tire and the rim, I like to take a rag or something while it's still pretty wet, and I will wipe off as much sealant as I can off the bead, the outside bead of the tire where it sits against the rim, because I want that seal to be as good as possible. If I get a bunch of clunks of sealant in there and I try and reseal it again, it'll probably seal, but it's not as good as it could be. And if you're going to put a tire away and you let that sealant dry on there, man, that may be just a monster to get that off. Where right now, when it's still kind of semi-moist, hopefully it is, at least you can wipe it off a little bit quicker. Now, I should mention, by the way, for the sake of transparency, the Wilderness Trail Bike, they send me that sealant at no cost to me, and I really appreciate that, because I got a whole lot of bikes to maintain. All right, that's about it. Tubeless tire sealant. Yeah, I know, it's just that kind of a necessary evil, isn't it? But I'll tell you what, it can save your bacon and keep you riding if you live in a place like I do, where there's little thorny things trying to get the air out of your tires. All right, you guys, that's it for this Tech Tuesday. Have a great week and or weekend. And as always, go ride your bikes and think about your sealant too.